All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Marty West. I'm the academic dean here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and on behalf of myself and Dean Noni Lasso, who is truly sorry to miss today's event due to a family emergency, it's my privilege to welcome you to today's forum. The Ask With Education Forum is our premier event series at HGSE, an opportunity for our community to come together in person and discuss the most exciting opportunities as well as the most pressing challenges facing our field. As you likely know, this is a challenging and in some ways paradoxical moment for higher education. The mission, purpose, and values of our post-secondary institutions are being called into question, leaving our university and many others to navigate uncertain and uncharted waters. But this moment also presents an opportunity to innovate, to imagine new ways of teaching and using technology to engage learners across the globe, new ways of bringing our research to the field when the field needs us most. Zeroing in on our topic for tonight, on the one hand, the building blocks for inclusion in education are everywhere: inclusive practices, research-based social emotional learning programs, and even social media, which enables new forms of voice and exposure to new ideas. We can point to growing acceptance and understanding of the real lived challenges with mental and physical health, alongside more robust expectations and practices with respect to inclusion and belonging. At the same time, we also seem to be at a quite different place, where efforts toward greater inclusion are often misunderstood and mischaracterized and are even under attack, with social media used as a tool to divide rather than empower. One mistake we might make in the present moment is to assume that the latter is the norm, as it feels so loud and so close. But I actually think if we take a longer view, it's the former that is the norm. It's just less visible right now, and that progress toward that norm may now be at risk. The work of Special Olympics and the more recent IMB framework and the Dignity Index that we will hear more about tonight are movements that build on, catalyze, and make visible the elements of the world grounded in the core tenets of inclusion that has been the life work of Tim Shriver, our featured speaker this evening. Before introducing Tim, I want to note that his work and this event both build on the extraordinary legacy of Tom Hare, a beloved HGSE faculty member and longtime inclusion advocate who passed away in 2022. Tom was an influential leader in the disability rights movement, dedicating his entire career to special education as a teacher, researcher, public servant, and policymaker. He served as the director of the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs from 1993 to 1999. And here on Appian Way, Tom inspired countless educators and leaders as a faculty member and advisor. Tom laid the groundwork in many ways for important conversations on how to truly include and empower all learners, much like the conversation we'll have today. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to acknowledge and celebrate his contributions. And now I'm pleased to introduce our special guest. Timothy Shriver leads the Special Olympics International Board of Directors, and together with 6 million Special Olympics athletes in more than 200 countries, they promote health, education, and a more unified world through the joy of sport. Throughout his life, Tim has been both an educator and an extraordinary leader. He co-founded and currently chairs the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, the leading organization in the field of social and emotional learning. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, co-chairman of the National Commission on Social and Emotional Learning, and president of the Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Foundation. What I admire most about Tim, in the same way I and others admired Tom, is his unwavering commitment to authentic inclusion, to embracing all people as humans, and to ensuring that resources and opportunities are equally available to all, especially to our children and youth, regardless of their level of ability. Tim has produced 4 films and authored New York Times best-selling books like Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most, in which he writes, I believe that people with intellectual disabilities are brilliant teachers of something bigger we're all looking for. Tim has never shied away from the work of genuinely understanding others or veered away from his belief that we can, and I quote, choose dignity by working to create a safer and healthier culture for future generations. Tim, we're so grateful to have you here at HGSE, and I can't wait to hear your remarks. So folks, please join me in welcoming Tim.
Thank you so much. I think I want to thank the dean and send my best wishes to the dean, but I think he got the call like 20 minutes ago to deliver this. So just like kudos for being able to pull all that together in such a short period of time, and what an honor to be mentioned with Tom Hare, a role model for me throughout my career, a person who not only in practice but in scholarship just exemplified why so many people see a special educator. I don't know if there are any special educators in the room, but sometimes when we see special educators, we just know we're in the presence of extraordinary grace and power and virtue, and Tom was that for me in my life, and I know for thousands and thousands of educators. So to be mentioned with him is a big honor, and to be mentioned with the rest of the folks who will come up here in a few minutes also. If Tom was sort of the godfather of, in some ways, of special education in its current form, Donna Hicks, who's here, is the godmother of the dignity movement in its current form. She's not the, maybe we have to go back to Socrates or Plato or somebody like that to find its origins, but I'm so, Donna and I have worked together for 6 years, I think we're counting 5 or 6 years, but never met until an hour ago. So it's a special honor, Donna, to be with you and to be able to pay tribute to you with the remarks I'll try to give today. And it's also, I don't know, it's kind of surreal to be here at Harvard with Harvard under siege and guys from Yale having to bail you out. That's inappropriate humor, and I hope it gets deleted from my remarks. But more seriously, at a time of such seriousness of purpose, where the very foundation of much of what we think of as education is being challenged, questioned, rethought, and maybe there are legitimate points of view on all sides in these debates. As an institution of higher learning, we have to hope and believe that there are good intentions on all sides of these debates, but at the same time, to come here today, at this moment in time, and to do what I can to reinforce the most foundational principles that I believe are at the core of both the university's mission and this school's mission is a huge honor. I was fully expecting that I might get the call yesterday or the day before. I'm sorry, we have to cancel. We can't do this kind of thing anymore. But here we are. Stephanie, thank you for, Dr. Jones, thank you for staying the course and for inviting this conversation, and I hope it's fruitful for all of us. So as you can see here, I want to open with Dr. King. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yes. Okay. Thank you to Stephanie. As I was thinking about this, it strikes me that the greatest struggles in American history have almost all been internal struggles. Most of the work of building this country has come as a function of struggles within the country. Whether we talk about the earliest struggles for religious freedom, for the rights and the questions of territory and turf for settlers and indigenous populations, and you go all the way up through the fight for human dignity for all people, where you go through the fight for equal protections under the law, you go through the fight for the rule of law, civil rights, all the related dimensions of rights work. It's always been a struggle between us that has brought out, I hope, in the end, the best of us. And my icon for the struggle, when we look for people who have led struggles that have been among us and between us, in-group struggles, if you will, is Dr. King. And, I've seen this quote a million times, and I was thinking about it in the context of today, especially the first part. Hate cannot drive out hate. Easy to say. Easy to write, easy to put on your wall, easy to post on a presentation, hard to do. Because when hate comes, when demonization and contempt and oppression come, it is really hard not to respond in kind. I've spent, as the dean said, 30 years of my career in the Special Olympics movement, where the largest question in play was, can human beings see beyond labels? So, as the dean mentioned, I wrote this book. I'm not pitching the book, by the way. But I did a book tour, and I go on this book tour, and there are about 30 people show up, and it's all exciting, and they buy books and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm in a hotel in a southern state, and I get in the elevator, and there's a guy in the elevator in a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and blue jeans, and I push the mezzanine or whatever it was, and the elevator starts to go up, and he looks over at me, and he says, "Anyone ever tell you, you look like a Kennedy?" And I was sort of distracted, and so I said, "Yeah, the door's open. I've heard that. I've heard that before." And he said, "Well, that must really piss you off, eh?" It's easy to say we should look beyond labels. It's hard to do. It's hard to do. How many dimensions of perception create snap judgments of risk and safety, create snap judgments of good and bad, create snap judgments of attractive and unattractive? So many ways. My particular facial structure or hair, whatever it was, created a judgment. Boom, boom, boom. Don't blame him. But in many ways, the work that I spent 30 years doing was trying to beat it. Could you beat the label? When you see a person with autism, or a person with Downs, or a person with Williams, or a person, could you beat the label? The fear, the anxiety, the judgment, the assumptions that accompany it really became and continues to be my life's work. My view, our view, based on our analysis of this moment, is that we're dealing with a particular version of labeling that Arthur Brooks, a colleague here at the university, calls the outrage industrial complex. This is, in our view, an insidious sort of unstated partnership between partisan media, the algorithm, and politics. And if you look at those three as wrapped in a cycle of promoting contempt, it's a roughly $2 trillion business selling you the idea that you ought to treat people you disagree with contempt. Now, you may decide, for reasons independent of all that you do treat other people with contempt. But just keep in mind, as Van Jones says, what's in your feed isn't always right. And what's in their feed, whoever they are, isn't always wrong. But this system of lionizing and normalizing contempt has become a new variation, because contempt isn't new. But the normalization, the lionization, the almost celebration of contempt as a means of communication, I believe, given this larger complex that we're surrounded by, is new. So you say to yourself, well, what's this got to do with education or the work now? Here's a couple of points. When we think about the breakdown of relationships, the Gottmans have said the most dangerous element in a relationship, best friends, husband, wife, spouses, partners, the most dangerous element in a relationship is contempt. When you start to see in your partner somebody who you treat with contempt, they would argue after 40 years of research, it's almost destined to be a turning point in the relationship. The relationship will fail if you don't correct it, right? So we have that. We have Richard Edelman, who does this trust barometer, 28 countries. And you can see here, this year's report suggests that 40% of people in all of these countries, by the way, it's not just the United States, believe that hostile activism, even 20% suggesting violence may be necessary. It's a game changer when this much hostility, this much aggrievement, this much anger has become normalized, not just in our country, but around the world. So here's data. Everybody's got data on this. It's not really helpful to point out the level of the problem, because like today, we know. But I do want to point out just one statistic in the middle here. About a third of us have ended a relationship in our families or with someone we love or know over politics. And we've looked at this a little bit. We don't have great data on who these people are, but we know there are lots of parents and children. We know there are lots of cousins and uncles and aunts. We know there are lots of best friends. I mean, I don't know about you, but my daughter last summer, wedding, yeah, but 3 of her friends wouldn't go because of what their best friend, the person she's marrying. I'm no longer friends with her because of who she's met. So this is a pattern where the insidious nature of the normalization of contempt has left us bereft of the skills or capability to transcend it, right? We give up. I've heard, my family, yeah, it's kind of funny, but it's actually not funny, honestly. I mean, I don't mean to be picking on you who laughed, but it's a disaster. It's really painful. Forget the politics. I mean, I have heard, he is dead to me, said. I think this is a big problem. Here's a little click. I'm going to show you, this is just a little reel. I'm going to show you this because I showed this last week. I told some of the students to high school, to about 500 high school students. Here's just a little click through of what you see on social media. Now, when I showed this in the high school, everybody laughed. Sorry, sorry to pick on you, but it wasn't a big laugh, but it was a low murmur laugh. 15, 16-year-olds. And I sort of said, why? One kid said, because it's funny. Another kid said, well, it's kind of cool when you can do that. So the kids were saying, this is normal. Like, this is before they have orange juice in the morning and they pick up their phones and they scroll through and you're disgusting and you're pathetic and that's the normal structure, the normal expectation for communication patterns. Just imagine, I mean, most of us are old enough that we didn't, let's say when we were 15, wake up with a cell phone next to our beds, that we actually had an hour or two before we got bombarded, usually with somebody else's version of reality. But imagine if the minute you wake up, that's what you see. We'll get into this a little bit more. So what's the solution? Here's a slide I've been using for 3 years, and this is the first time Donna Hicks has seen the slide. Donna, just stand up and wave. Give it a wave. Let's hear it for Donna. Donna has done work in South Africa. Her book has an introduction from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. But this is a person who comes at this work from the point of view of working with people who have seen the worst in each other, who have killed each other's family, who have been in violent conflict. And Donna points out that along with our survival instincts, the yearning to be treated with dignity is right up there. And I match her here with Richard Rohr, who comes at this from a spiritual perspective, because the larger view that I think undergirds this, you don't have to be religious to think this, but we're at almost like a second axial age. That's a whole different talk. Don't worry, I won't go into it. But if we're at a pivot point in culture where something new has to be born, in my view, Richard complements Donna's point by saying we are only going to make it if we find ourselves treating each other with an inherent original goodness and a universally shared dignity. Not an earned dignity, not a credentialed dignity, an inherent dignity. So our view is that the diametric opposite of treating someone with contempt, you're subhuman, you're worse, you're less than me, is dignity. I see some part of myself in you, no matter what, right? So it's all nice to say, but Emmanuel Cleaver said to us years ago, everybody wants politicians, everybody wants the algorithm, everybody wants news media to do this, but nobody measures us, nobody holds us accountable, nobody gives us money. Contributions don't go up when we treat the other side with dignity. They actually, honestly, I'm sorry to say, often go down, right? So when Representative Cleaver said this, and we thought to ourselves, how do we reach adults with this message? We said game on, and we created this dignity index, which hopefully you have in front of you. So a couple of quick points on this, and then I'm going to jump into some examples. The Dignity Index measures only one thing. It does not measure whether you're right. It does not measure whether you're morally good. It does not measure whether you've checked your facts. It does not measure your background. It does not measure your life experience. It just measures how you treat someone when you disagree. That's it. Right? So you see here on the upper, how we treat each other when we disagree. The only variable we're interested in here. All right? So in a disagreement, there are a million variables. I'm going to make the argument today that this one variable has the capacity to shift the way in which we think about many of the others. Has the capacity to, is not assured of being able to do so, but has the capacity to. The scale works 4 down, you have higher and higher, deeper and deeper levels of contempt. A 4 is just I'm a little better. A 3 is good and bad. A 2 is evil. And a 1 is subhuman. And they're not even, you know. And by the way, people say, well, thank God we never hear 1s. No, we hear 1s. We can pull 1s almost any week in public discourse. And I don't mean on social media from anonymous sources either. I mean from elected officials. Okay? So the scale goes from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 downward, from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 upward. A 5 is sort of like when I'm in conversation with you, Sean, I get my 5 minutes, you get your 5 minutes, okay? You get your time, I get my time. That's a 5. You have a right to be heard, I have a right to be heard. A 6 goes a little further. Let's probe. I bet there's something we agree on here. We don't see this problem the same way, but I bet we can find common values. A 7 jumps up another step. A 7, a telltale sign of a 7 is, I want to actually know about why we don't agree. And I want to be open to the idea that I might have something to learn here. I might be wrong. How many times, be honest, do you start a debate by saying, I might be wrong, which is the very nature of intellectual curiosity and should be the foundation of intellectual inquiry? Because otherwise, you're just repeating. You could just have an AI bot repeat what's already in a book. But we should be much better at 7 and then up to 8, where you see a person who might look across the table, as Donna has seen, someone who's, let's say, taken the life of someone in my family and says to them, I'm still going to treat you with dignity. So I'm going to give you a couple of just quick examples here. This top quote here is from Leon Mugesera at the very beginning of the Rwandan genocide. Anyone whose neck you do not cut is the one who will cut yours. The quote at the bottom here is from Heinrich Himmler in the midst of the Shoah. Whether nations live in prosperity or starve to death interests me only insofar as I can make them slaves. Right? These are, if you look at your scorecard, and you're very brilliant Harvard people, you will be able to determine these are 1s. These are 1 quotes. They're not even human. It's our moral duty to destroy them. They're after us. They got to go. That's one language. Here's a completely different, this is John McCain. It's kind of a long quote. Seems almost like from a different era, right? Anybody want to take a stab at how you'd score that? Six. Bingo. That's a 6. Quick study. There you go. I knew I'd have some smart ones here. So you hear in him not just the equal time, not quite, he's not going after, like, where do we split? He's just trying, he says, wait, let's find some common ground. Like, maybe we could, on immigration, I mean, this is why these debates are so insidious. There's so much common ground. The idea that this country is so hateful of each, I mean, so McCain would have been as part of, in fact, on immigration with Democrats. I happen to know one who worked with him closely on these things. Many other Democrats and Republicans knew that there was common ground on these issues. But they didn't want to solve it. Why? Because outrage was more powerful. That's the truth. So that's a 6. So here's, we'll do one more, and I'll just read this quickly. This is Pharrell Williams. By the way, just to be clear, I found this picture on the internet. I'm so proud of myself. It's a good one, right? Like, it's pretty cool, right? I'm telling you, the world is a beautiful place, but it does not work without empathy and inclusion. This is off the cuff, by the way. This was on a morning show 5 or 6 years ago. God is love. The universe is love. That's the only way it functions. I get it. Sometimes divisive stuff works. We learned that last year. He's talking about the election. Sometimes divisive stuff works. But you got to choose what side you're on. So I love that line. Say this to everybody. Choose where you're going to stand. I'm choosing empathy. I'm choosing inclusion. I'm choosing love for everybody, just trying to lift everyone, even when I disagree with someone. I'm wishing them the best and hoping for the best, because we can't win the other way. Off the cuff, that's a classic. Anybody want to take a stab? It's an easy answer. It's an 8. So you can see, even in the face of disagreement, even in the face of hostility, even in the face of contemptuous language, I'm choosing to hope for the best. I'm making my choice to try that direction. So, okay, we're going to do a couple of quickies here. Simone Biles. I know how much time do we have, Stephanie? Okay. Do you want to do a few more quick scoring exercises? Here's Simone Biles. This is a test. Now, you will be graded, even though I can't collect your papers. I think it's all about sportsmanship. We don't care. This is her at the Olympics last year. We don't care whether we win or lose. We're always going to keep a good face and support competitors. Shouldn't say support our teammates, support our competitors, because they've worked just as hard as we have for that moment. You have to give them their flowers, and that's exactly what me and Jordan were doing when they bowed. I don't know if you remember on the on the medal stand, the second and third place gymnasts turned and bowed to the winner, the Brazilian gymnast who won. Simone Biles was, I think she got the silver medal in the competition. What do you think? Shout it out. 7. That's a 6. Here's why it's not a 7. A 7 will acknowledge, there has to be an edge. There has to be something that's come at me. Like, you have to have attacked me. And I have to have said, okay, I want to know more about this. So she's basically saying, we share the values of competitor, right? And even though we're competing against each other, I respect those shared values. Taylor Swift is a psycho. She's the cancer of the music industry. Seriously. Never seen such a fame-hungry and stats-obsessed artist in my life. You're not paying attention, Rick. Maybe it's time for you to quit teaching. What do you think? We give that a 3 because the level of, she's not ruining the world. She's not evil. She's just the bad kind of person. It's just like, I'm against her. Right? It's not us or them. It's not like, I think she should be crushed. I think she should be stopped. That would be more like a 2. I think she should be killed would be a 1, right? So here you're starting to see the nuances in these positions a little bit. I claim to be a simple individual, liable to err like any other fellow mortal. I own, however, that I have humility enough to confess my errors, to retrace my steps. It's unwise to be too sure of one's own wisdom. It's healthy to be reminded that the strongest might weaken and the wisest might err. Mahatma Gandhi. What do you give it? That's a dead to rights 7. In part because you hear this admission quality, right? So here's what, just to tee up here. When people see this on first blush, they think a 7 is a doormat. or an 8, you're going to concede the ground. Nobody accuses Mahatma Gandhi of being a doormat. Nobody, at least I don't think most people do. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this issue of how to confront people you disagree with profoundly, confront even oppression or aggression. But keep in mind that there is no mention in any of this of conceding your principles. Here are everything on this slide is taken from a social emotional learning curriculum. So all of these skills are currently taught in kernels. On the camera, I said that. Are currently taught in many different levels of K-12 education. We teach kids how to be curious, not furious. We teach kids how to regulate before they debate. We teach kids how to acknowledge knowledge in a conversation. Oh, okay, I understand that you've said that the facts of this case suggest that we ought to wrap this up more quickly because it's getting boring. I don't believe so. Anyway, nobody got that. Anyway, these are skills that we pulled them for this purpose because they all are designed to help move you up. Right? If you're down and you're feeling 2 energy, you might want to regulate, right? If you're at 4 and you want to move up to 6 and you don't feel like it, you might want to think, how can I just at least acknowledge that the other person has a point of view before I engage in stating my own? So there's a couple of things that come out in this. The first thing is that when people look at this index, the first thing you do, most people do, is say, I can use it to judge. Like, I can go to Rick's class, and I'm going to be able to score him and catch him when he does a 3 or a 2 or 4, and I'm going to report him, if I don't like him, right? Or I'm going to catch the President Trump or President Biden, whoever it is. I'm going to catch them, and but actually what people almost immediately move to is they're actually much more interested in themselves. So when we did the norming and validating of the instrument, we trained about 24 students at the University of Utah over the course of a summer term. It's about 6 weeks. And the students were all prepared to score the midterm elections in 2022 in Utah. And they did, but they said we actually lost interest in the midterm elections. I'm using it with my boyfriend. I'm using it with my father when he calls on Sunday night and drives me crazy. I'm using it with the people in my dorm who are always playing the music. So it became a way for people to see themselves. Now I'm going to show you that this is not an easy skill, but there are examples of people who know how to do it. Here's one.
Maxine, are you smart?
Yeah.
Are you strong?
Yeah.
Are you brave?
Yeah.
Are you pretty?
Yeah.
Are you kind?
Not really.
Now that's self-awareness at 4, right? And I just think this is just such a fascinating clip. But the thing she chooses to admit to not being is kind, right? So she's aware that either she doesn't maybe feel the social pressure to be kind yet. Developmentally, maybe that's not locked in. But she knows she's got work to do. Right? So this is an example. She didn't learn the dignity index, but this is an example of the mirror effect. Second point that comes out: contempt operates by disguise. All of the great psychologists of the 20th century and some of this century too have pointed to the way in which shadow or unconscious, how these things operate for us. We don't see them. What we have found in using this index is that people don't see their own contempt. They know the other side is contemptuous. But as one woman said to me, I hate hateful people. And most people will say that without hearing their own hate until they say it or see it. And then they go, wait a minute. Have I become what I oppose? Have I descended into the same trap that those people who I loathe are in, that I claim that they're in? So contempt, by using the index, seems to reveal that contempt is operating within us. Here's another one. What seems to also happen is people almost intuitively realize they want to find their own center when they're in debates after they use this index. So when we feel treated with contempt, it's almost intuitive to lash out. Donna has right, it's almost automatic. When a dignity violation has been leveled against you, you want to level one back against me. And that's why the kids were laughing, because they saw that those guys got people back, right? So the dignity index we have found helps people see from their own center. And this is an example of how we teach this to second graders. Now again, these skills are easy to teach in many situations. How do you turtle? How do you self-regulate? You draw in, you put your hands on your shoulders, you take 3 deep breaths. You say, I'm going to be okay. Done, don't worry. I'm good, I'm okay. Positive self-talk. These are all dimensions of regulating in the midst of debate. And we have found that the dignity index helps with these things. Here's the most important one. There's a lot of words on this slide, but we'll talk about this when we come up. And this is from our colleague Tom Rochert. He writes, a typical social media post recently said that our call for dignity was a slap in the face to people being deeply hurt right now. Here's our view. Here's a view. Honoring people's dignity does not mean softening our passions. It doesn't call for us to drop any conviction. It just asks you to add one. Treat people with dignity. And here's what we think is the secret here. The underlying capacity to treat people with dignity actually makes them more accountable, rather than less so. The idea here is that when I stop saying, Donna's a jerk, she's malevolent, she's misguided, she's malicious, she's got a background, when I actually have to unpack what she's done, and I can actually focus on the actual programs, policies, outcomes, and data. And then I can say, all these things are contributing to very damaging, oppressive, or negative outcomes. I pull out the contempt for the opponent and isolate the practice, which we believe counterintuitively, because your instinct is to say, that son of a, right? Your instinct is to counterattack the person. Our instinct, I should say, our human instinct. Even if your cause is just, even if what you say is true, if you express it with contempt for the other side, it increases divisions, makes enemies, and undercuts your cause. We'll talk about that because there's many differences of opinion here. If you are wondering how this relates to what Marty said earlier about inclusion, when we built the idea of an inclusive mindset with Dr. Jones and her team, what we found includers do is they have higher degrees of empathy, higher degrees of perspective taking, higher degrees of what I call moral courage, we now call courageous action. They risk their own equity, but they also have in common a perception that everybody deserves dignity. These are kids, right? So we built these cards and we started with these questions here. Can I sense how others feel? Am I willing to be brave? And we're using these cards now with kids and asking them to write their statements. What's your statement for universal dignity? Am I treating others with dignity? Do I care about everyone? Are all people the same? And kids can make lists of these questions and ways in which they can see dignity in themselves, ways in which they can practice empathy. All this is teachable, right? All of these skills are teachable. By the way, I have these really cool cards if you want one afterwards. So just a quick, and then we'll wrap up. What we found with the Dignity Index is that teachers are already using it in classrooms. So you can use it to teach iMessages. You can use it to analyze characters. We had a series of about 130 eighth graders who analyzed political ads in the last cycle. And they all came up with their scores. And Tammy Pfeiffer, my colleague, and I went and zoomed into the classroom because they had debates about this ad. Was this ad a 3 or was it a 6? So it's a very teachable tool both for academics and for didactic instruction. The Utah schools, in particular the Salt Lake City schools, this is one of my favorite things you see here in the lower right-hand corner, code of conduct. The code of conduct in Salt Lake City is what they're calling 5 and up. So they're teaching kids the index and then challenging them to use 5 and up language when they disagree with a peer. So they're saying, we're challenging you to stay on the dignity side of disagreement, not to descend into contempt. They're also using it for school board meetings, asking adults who ask questions. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. Could you prohibit language that is 1 and 2 as part of a code of conduct? Could you restrict, if someone starts to attack people viciously, violently, could you say, this is not an environment in which that level of speech is tolerated? But not to make it as a judgment against this person using the speech or that person, but to say, we have a standard. Objectively, you're using level 2 language. That is prohibited in our school board meeting or in our university. So here's kind of where we'll pivot here. This can all feel overwhelming. I was at a talk given, it must have been 20 years ago, with Bishop Tutu, and as you all know, he worked with Donna and others on the Truth and Reconciliation, the post-apartheid changes in South Africa, but was a religious and faith-based leader for his whole life. And I was privileged to be at a talk he gave, large, 1,000 people. And at the end of the talk, he was cheery and laughing and telling stories and poignant, meaningful, painful stories, but did it with such lightness and high energy. And someone got up in the back and said, Archbishop, don't you just have to admit that evil is more powerful than good? And he sort of giggled a little bit. He says, no, evil's not more powerful than good. He said, but it is better organized. So the end of my pitch here is this university is in the middle of trying to organize itself for a new set of challenges. And so is our country. You may be part of the epicenter of that, but the country's in the midst of trying to reorganize itself in some way or another and find a new energy, a new sense of possibility. And people that are who are trying to tear things down are well organized. And people who want to pit us against each other, I'm sorry to say, I don't blame them because it's a business, I suppose, but it's well organized. It's really well organized. If we want to try something different, we got to get after it. Almost three quarters of Americans want something different. This is More in Common research, just came out a couple weeks ago. 70% of us feel a responsibility to connect across lines of race, religion, politics, gender, geographic origin. Americans want to do this. They don't know how. Not all. 70% is not 100, but it's a lot. It's 250 or so million people who want to do better. The primary obstacle they find to connecting across difference is they don't know how, they don't see other people doing it. So they're looking, where's the subculture where they do this? Like, I don't see it up here. Do I see it in my faith-based institution, in my civic club, at my place of business? That's why Bank of America has embraced this work, I think so vigorously. We've trained 20,000 managers at one of the largest banks in the world. Why? Because they want to create a culture where people see it and can trust it and can say, I want to work there. This is a really, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to leave us at the closing here with what I think is almost a textbook example of how we can think about this. This is Stephen Colbert last year commenting on the death of
folks,
Toby Keith.
as you've probably heard, last night we lost one of the greats. Country music legend Toby Keith passed away at the age of 62. Now, I was shocked and saddened when I saw the news this morning. I knew Toby was ill, and he'd been fighting stomach cancer for some time, but I still had hope that we'd see each other again and that we would hear him on the stage. Because I was lucky enough to become friends with Toby over the years, as improbable as that seems. We met very early on the Colbert Report, and back then there was a not-so-helpful legend that I had knives out for some of my guests, and it didn't help that at the beginning I sometimes did. And I remember having some kind of plan for Toby, I think related to his Boot in Your Ass song. But right before I went on stage, I remember vividly looking down at my shoes and saying, "What are you doing? You're a host. He's your guest. Make him feel welcome. See who he is." And what do you know? We hit it off like a house of fire. I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed talking to Toby Keith. And evidently, Toby had a good time too, because after the show, I was headed to a post-mortem meeting, and he was coming out of his green room, and those rooms were on the same hallway. And as he was heading for the door that goes out onto 54th Street, he turned and caught my eye and said, "Hey, man, you do a great job. Whatever the it is you do." And I took that as the greatest compliment, so much so that my then head writer, Allison Silverman, for Christmas, had that stitched on a pillow for me. And it has been in my office ever since.
I'm going to stop there. It goes on. The clip is fantastic. Watch the whole thing. It's another 2 or 3 minutes. You see, do you hear him say, I looked down at my shoes and I thought to myself, what are you doing? I'm the host. Find something. And then you have this country music star and this, New York comedian, opposite ends of the political spectrum. He goes on to describe their friendship, how shocked he was by things they held in common, even though they continued to disagree. It's a beautiful, if we'd had writers there and said, could you please script it this way, you couldn't script a more beautiful, in my view at least, explanation of how this work can proceed. I leave you here for the conversation now in the background with Special Olympics athletes. This is Ajara Silla, standing in a moment of triumph, a person with an intellectual disability from sub-Saharan Africa, came in 7th place, as beautiful as a human being can get, right? No labels, please. Let's meet each other. Everybody's got a gift. Even the people, it's easy to admire Ajara. Difficult to admire people whose positions we loathe and who we want to stop from executing their plans. But maybe there's a way in which we can graduate or move into a new level at which her example inspires us. So I'll stop there. Thank you all very much for listening. I think there's a question.
Thanks, Tim, for remarks that are timely, inspiring, and dare I say it, convicting in parts. I'm really looking forward to the next part of our program, and I'm going to invite our panelists to the stage, and I'll introduce them quickly so we can get into conversation. First, Stephanie Jones is the Lesser Professor in Early Childhood Development and Director of the EASL Lab here at HGSE. She will also be our moderator for the evening. Then we have Sam Catherine Johnston, Chief Post-Secondary and Workforce Development Officer at CAST, a nonprofit education research and development organization that has made education more inclusive and accessible by creating the Universal Design for Learning framework and guidelines. These are now used globally. And rounding out the panel are 2 HGSE faculty members, Sean Ginwright, the Jerome T. Murphy Professor of the Practice and co-founder of Flourish Agenda, and Rick Weisbord, a senior lecturer on education and the faculty director of the Making Karen Common initiative. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Oh, really good. Thank you.
Okay, is this on? It is, perfect. I'm fighting with myself because I prepared all these questions and we even talked about them, and now I want to ask other questions. So
It's fine with me.
and I also want to say a whole lot of stuff myself, which is terrible, but I'm the moderator. So I'm just going to say a couple of things, which is they're like immediate reactions to some of this. And Tim and I have known each other for a long time, and we worked on the Inclusive Mindsets and Behaviors framework and social emotional learning and all that stuff. And I'm left as a developmentalist thinking, like, how do you get to a 1? Like, what are the pathways to a 1 on the Dignity Index? What are the pathways to a 10? Like, how do folks get to those places? And, you know, once we think about that, what are the ways that we can interrupt those pathways? And each of you shows up at that question from a different place. We have like moral development and social emotional learning, trauma healing, trauma-informed work in schools, all the stuff you just talked about, Tim and Sam, you know, universal design for learning. Like, how do you see your work reflected in these ideas, or these ideas reflected in your work? And then we're going to get to a more complicated question. So we'll just maybe start. We're going to skip you.
Yeah,
as you
please.
just talked.
Please.
We'll start with you, Rick, and then we'll get to sort of I think the questions that you were leading us to in your presentation. So how do you see all your work aligned with this?
So I spent 2 months preparing for the other question you told me you were going to ask.
This is how this
Spend 2
works.
months. That was not true. See, I didn't call him a liar.
So is the question, though, about how dignity fits into
Yeah.
the work
From your
on,
perspective, your work on moral
The work on moral
development, making
development.
caring common.
Well, I would say two things. You know, one is that we are very much about cultivating in children the capacity to care for other people. And we don't just think of caring as a quantity. So we think about who do you care for? And the big issue for most people, almost all of us care for somebody, family, friends, whatever, is do you care for people who are different from you in race, class, culture? It's your circle of concern, and how do you expand your circle of concern? And by circle of concern, I mean, who do you accord respect and dignity in part? But also in a school context, are you respecting the school custodian, the school secretary, the bus driver, these people that can become invisible? Are you making them visible and helping children understand the ways in which those people contribute to your life? And gratitude and dignity, I think, are very connected. But let me just also say, and this is, I think, leading up to your second question quickly, that the other way this intersects with my work is that I do feel like, you know, we are all on this panel great proponents of empathy, and Barack Obama has talked about empathy. You have a wonderful quote about empathy here. But I do feel like it's very different to ask somebody who's privileged and has power to empathize with somebody who doesn't have privilege and power than to ask for somebody who's been marginalized and oppressed to have empathy or to treat with dignity somebody who they view as their oppressor. Those are very different asks. And I think that Martin Luther King and certain theological conditions are asking for this very high bar of loving your oppressor and respecting your oppressor. But that's a high bar for a lot of people. It's a high bar for me. And if we're going to ask kids to do that, I think we have to really engage them in the work of doing that. And that's not simple work, but moral work. So let me stop there.
So I'm going to turn to you, Sean. I think
Yeah.
Rick has put on the table this question.
Yeah,
Like,
first of all, Tim, I think that's extraordinary work you're doing.
I meant to say that too, Tim.
Yeah,
Sorry.
oh, I meant to say it too.
He doesn't mean it, I can tell you.
and you do look like a Kennedy too,
Thank
by
you,
the way.
thank you.
I was like, I think that this constellation of work, this work about fundamentally asking how do we treat one another as human beings, is forcing us to ask questions and answer questions that will inevitably save our democracy. This is the work that I think we need to be doing in our country right now. And it's hard work because fundamentally it asks each and every one of us to ask ourselves a question: who do I have to be so that you could be fully human, even if you don't agree with me? And I think that question, asking that question, is a more fundamental question than our politics. It's a more fundamental question about the role of schools. My own work has been about trying to heal those that have the wounds of oppression, yet encourage them to have the courage and the vision of healing so that they can actually make connections and see the dignity in others. And that's hard work. It's really hard work. But I think that is the fundamental work that we need to engage ourselves in, and that the role of schools can be fundamentally about training and supporting young people about who do I have to be as a human being so that you can be more fully human. I think part of our challenge is sort of what Brian Stevenson talks about in his book, Just Mercy, which is we have a nation that is not proximal, that we don't be together. I don't see you together. I've never been to the Midwest and spent time in communities. And it is that distance, the greater the distance that we have, it's harder for me to see you as a human being. It's much more easy for me to actually do that. So my work has been about, and I see the intersection of really asking the fundamental question about who do we have to be as human beings, and what does it mean to be a human being so that I could actually allow you to be a human being in the same way.
Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I think universal design for learning and how it sort of fits in with this, I think what it really does is it sort of chips at something that I think really holds us back from having universal dignity, and that's sort of just this idea that normal is better, and we breed it into our kids so young, and we do it in a way that categorizes and classifies and allows us to push people aside and to, decide who has the right to what resources in school, who has the right to what jobs. And I think UDL in a really fundamental way sort of chips away at really the idea that there's normal at all. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. And I think it helps us have a framework for thinking about, okay, let's look at where barriers are in our environment, and let's look at removing those or lowering those so we can bring more people into the conversation, more people who are, similar in ways, different in other ways. And I think it starts to have people, through their experience, through their relationships with people who aren't like them, through the work of inclusion, start to say, this normal thing is overrated. Like, I feel it overrated in my own life, And then I think if we can do that with kids, then we can do it with them as they grow. We can do it with adults. And I think that one thing we've gotten really wrong over the last long time, I don't know how long, but is just our idea of intellect is so bad and it's so problematic, and it does so much to say, these people have it and these people don't. And I think part of the work of having dignity for people really is like getting away from these assumptions about who's smart and who's not, and what makes someone capable and what makes someone not. And that's, I think that's work that we've got to all work on. I don't think that's any end of the political spectrum problem. I think that's all of our problems.
So it's not a type of person or an age of person, it's for everyone. I mean, I think what everybody has touched on in some ways is, is it even possible to do any of this, right? Is it possible to really, truly have dignity for someone who treats others with violence or, malice, malintent, like all of those really harsh things? Like, can you really actually do that? And is it appropriate to ask that, right? What do you think about that? I mean, the other thing that I would align with that is that the outrage part is addictive, right? I think part of the challenge is that there's a contagiousness to it that's really hard to interrupt. So anybody, I mean, Tim, you might have first thoughts, or anyone who wants to.
I've talked enough. I want to
Okay.
listen to these guys. I want to listen to you all.
Like, how could we do this? I mean, maybe this gets into the practice, or.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a challenge that we have, progressives on the left, is struggling with the question, is my rage turning me into the very thing that I want to, that I despise? That is it turning me into hate? Is it consuming me? And I think that folks that are trying to create freedom and justice, if we're engaging in that work without wrestling with that question, then we become so seduced into contempt as justice, right? Seeing contempt and hatred as a form of righteous justice. And I think that type of work, the work that you're doing, the work that we're all sort of doing in many ways, is the more fundamental work that we need to engage in. How do we listen in ways that we can still disagree, but I don't dehumanize you? that is work. And I think that is what's before us now. That's the kind of forums, the kind of conversations, and the kind of skills that I think we need to advance, advance work of democracy.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One is, I think it's very hard at this moment that, one dimension this we haven't talked about. It's very hard to have a shared morality when we don't have a shared reality, and we don't have a shared reality in the country right now. That people are living in very different media ecosystems. They have different sources of information. I think part of our disagreements are about different sources of information, and unless we can piece together a shared reality, it's going to be very hard to have these conversations. But I also want to reinforce something that Tim said, and something that's in the data. Again, our surveys, when we ask people, do you want to engage people who don't share your political views, about 15% say yes. When we ask them, do you want to engage people who don't share your political views if they treat you respectfully, about 2/3 say yes. So this huge jump. And so part of it, I think, is that we go into these conversations expecting to be disrespected. And if we can begin to create some kind of positive contagion here, which a number of organizations are trying to do, including Tim's, we may get to a different place.
So how do you make a shared reality?
I mean, I think only one thing I would add to what you're saying early on, and how do you get people to want, or how do you get people to attend? I think one thing that's really important and undervalued, and I think this gets back to why, one of the reasons I just don't like the way we've conceived of intellect or being intelligent or whatever, is I think we don't give people enough opportunity to not feel humiliated by what they don't know. And I think that's a huge problem, because then people are like, well, you know what? I don't have to know. I don't have to care. I can have my own version of reality because I'm embarrassed, or I feel, at some point someone humiliated me that I didn't know this thing, or I wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't rich enough, or I wasn't whatever. So we got to find ways to not make people feel humiliated that they don't know things. Who cares if you don't know things? Lots of people don't know things. There's got to be more room for that.
We get attacked sometimes, or attack may be too strong, but challenged on the question of whether we're trying to constrain free speech. Are you trying to say that you shouldn't say things? The biggest threat to free speech is exactly what these two. The biggest threat to free speech right now is the fear that how you'll be treated by someone if you say what you actually think.
Right.
Now, if I asked everybody in the room to raise their hand if in the last month they haven't said something in a social setting because they were afraid of how they would be treated if they did, I don't know about this room, but every other room I've ever asked that, and every hand goes up. 30 days, have you held your speech because you're afraid? Yeah. So it's not the government that's acting. I mean, maybe that's not true anymore. I shouldn't say that. In general, we're not trying to make people politically correct with this work. We're trying to make it safe for people to be able to express themselves so that we can actually get to a common reality. Because you're right. If we're just living in two different universes and I'm trying to send something on email and get somebody to change their mind, it's a hopeless case. Or trying to talk to somebody who's lived a reality of enormous pain, multi-generational trauma, and I've said, well, why don't you just, take a deep breath? I mean, you got to be kidding me, right? That's ridiculous. It's insulting because we haven't done the work. But the beginning of the work, it seems to me, if we want to actually create a safe conversation, is to say, I won't treat you with contempt. I may disagree. If someone says something that you disagree with, the point here is not to not disagree. This is not a be nice campaign. Yeah. In fact, it's the opposite. It's making it safe for people to be passionate without being hateful. And what we've done, I think, historically, this is the point you're making, is we've kind of fused the two. If I'm angry enough, then I'm actually passionate. If I hate people enough, I'm proving my bona fides. And I agree with you completely, Rick, about the power imbalance question. It's a completely different set of questions in every context. And we've had a lot of kids say to us, in fact, wait a second, there are times when I need to be prepared to do too because my physical safety is at risk, right? And we say, yeah, absolutely. The point, sorry, I thought that was somebody else a minute ago. The point here is not that you should never use contempt. The just war theory is a justification for violence, which countries have used for at least 2,000 years as a moral justification for violence. People like Gandhi and King come along and challenge that moral justification for violence. But there's a lot of people who would say, in certain situations, violence is necessary. This is just to be able to let you, last thing I'll say about this is, I presented at West Point last summer, at the beginning of this school year, at the end of last summer. And I went up there thinking, these guys are going to run me over. I mean, I'm talking about trying to get people to stop killing each other, and they're training, spending their whole lives training to kill people. It was the exact opposite. They were like, this is exactly what we study here, because we never want to be in a war that isn't precise, isn't quick, isn't targeted, limits civil. That's our whole training here, is when violence is necessary to make it as limited as possible. So, the index is not designed to tell you what answer you should give. It's designed to help you see the optionality, to give yourself, so you can ask yourself the question, am I becoming what I loathe? And the answer may be, for the time being, yes. He's got to be out of my life. I don't, I cannot treat him with dignity. Maybe in a year I can, but not now. That's okay. I'm not here to say that's a naughty, naughty boy, naughty girl type thing. It's just here to say, here are your options, and watch where each option takes you.
So I forgot to say something at the beginning, which is, if you have a question, there are these cards floating around, and we have people who will collect them, and we'll read out some questions for the panel. So if you have a question, get a card. They're being passed around, and please do write down your question. Nancy has one right up here. I guess I'm thinking about all the incredible work, Tim, that you've done, that everybody on this panel has done in schools, with the goal, not always the same exact goal, but the goal of doing similar things, what you're talking about, which is, but we're still right here where we are, like social emotional learning has been in schools for 50 years, right? There's been tremendous interest in it. You showed the key components of it. So what could we do better or differently? Or what is the dignity practice that you would suggest, in schools? I'm turning to you, Sean.
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell. And I actually had this question for Tim or anybody on there. Sort of like, social emotional learning is certainly important, non-cognitive process for young people. But I'm also curious about grace. And that is, how do we practice grace? Because it seems to me that there's a relationship with deep grace and dignity. Can I actually have dignity without grace? And I think that part of what I'm trying to understand, and it's kind of a question, is that possible? Can we actually practice dignity without grace? And that is, most of us know quite well how to be accountable, how to hold ourselves accountable, how to hold others accountable, how to hold the system accountable. But I'm not so sure that we know how to practice grace. And is grace part and parcel of how we achieve dignity? And that seems to me that that's not a cognitive skill set, that's not maybe even a behavioral skill set. There's a spiritual dimension of which I think we're talking about here. There's a deep spiritual sort of undergirding of what needs to occur that allows us to see each other as fully human. And I think grace is probably the portal of doing that. So I don't know if we learn that in schools or in classrooms, or how do we actually do that? So it was kind of a question and a comment. So I don't know if I did it right, because I'm supposed to answer the question, but I gotta ask the question at the same time, so.
I mean, it makes me think of one of the core elements of social emotional learning is just slowing down. And there's some grace in that moment, right? The moment of just slowing down and maybe giving yourself the chance to see what's happening, right? But it's not exactly the same. Either Sam or Rick, what do you guys think about the practice? What's the practice? How do we get to dignity?
I mean, I think there's a lot of a lot that comes out of treating every person like every human is a learner, every human is capable of being a learner, and I don't know why this is coming to me now, but I remember last year being at a bat mitzvah for somebody who uses assistive technology, and there was an organization that helped her with her bat mitzvah, and it was the most beautiful thing to see all the work that was done to welcome her into being a woman in her faith. And I was like, that to me is everything. Like every aspect of this ceremony, they've taken as a given that she's a great learner, that she can learn to, maybe with an assistive device, but learn to participate in the prayers that she's supposed to see, to welcome her into her faith. No one is, right? To me, that's a living, breathing example of universal dignity, and it requires a true commitment to seeing every person is capable of learning, of capable of being part of their faith, of capable of being part of our school systems, of our workforce, whatever it is. And I think we need to spend more time on that. I'm really seeing each person is capable of learning. It doesn't need to look the same for everybody. We're not all going to get to the same place. But I think we have to see it.
You got it.
No. Well, I want to pick up on what Sean's saying. I do think, we polled this in the beginning, the word dignity, and it did not poll well. Respect polled much higher. And we had a guy who really wanted to invest in our success, Frank Luntz, who's a political pollster, saw the divisiveness in the country 3 years ago, says, you got to change it to the respect index, and then you're going to go like wildfire. And we chose not to, because at least in our view, the definitional distinction is dramatic. Respect is earned. Kids will say, I've been disrespected, right? I do not respect you. You've done things, and I think that's legitimate. Like, I think you earn respect. I do not respect some of our political leaders right now. That doesn't mean I have to treat them with contempt. So contempt, to your point, in our view, is inviolable and universal. So when you say those things, you're asking people to access a different way of thinking. It's not really thinking. I would almost argue that there's a different kind of zone of perception. I'd go into a lot more detail on this if we had lots more time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But I think you actually ask people, when I say to people like, well, wait a second, how do you, like you say, should you treat people on death row with dignity? Most progressives would say, yeah, absolutely. They've committed serious crimes, even if they admit it's very serious. Yes, they should still be treated with dignity. Do they deserve my respect? Maybe not. Maybe not. So there's something different about dignity that is almost, it's a received gift. It's not an earned gift. And the receptive faculty, the capacity to receive someone, even someone who presents to you with loathsome qualities. And I don't mean to extend too much the analogy to the special needs world, but that's where we've been. When the Special Olympics movement was started, there were 200,000 Americans in institutions in this country. Not 20, not 200, 200,000 people for life, because they were loathsome, because they were valueless, because they were ruined families if they were allowed to stay in families. So this language that we use now in politics resonates in a painful way for people with intellectual differences, right? So to break those walls required the capacity what you just talked about, Sam, which is to see, wait a second, I'm not going to evaluate you based on your IQ. I mean, I know that sounds like pretty obvious, but it's actually a pretty big leap.
It's a big leap.
So there is a dimension of perception of someone that is not based on what I'd call a cognitive criteria.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, just a couple things quickly. I think there's something, and this won't surprise you, Stephanie, as Stephanie started making Care in Common with me, and this was sort of the basis of the work. But I do feel like we have elevated individual, and our research suggests this, individual success as the primary goal of child raising to a way that may be, to a degree that may be unprecedented in history. and demoted caring for others and caring for the common good. And so part of what we're seeing here is hyper-individualism and a lack of interest in other people's dignity or other people's well-being. I also think there are, to your question, Steph, there are practices in schools that have to do with teaching kids to ask questions and listen deeply and to appreciate complexity, that we should honor and make it a source of pride. I thought about this in the Israeli-Hamas conflict last year when everybody's popping off on social media. Make it a source of pride to find the person, the smartest person you know who disagrees with you and engage with that person before you get on social media. We should make it a point of pride to be able to take a nuanced position that coordinates multiple perspectives in a way that we don't. We should make it a point of pride to say, I don't know, I don't have enough information to know. I think all these things, all these types of practices will help us with the work of having, yeah.
But I want to also point out, Rick, you said this at least implicitly. Most of us are followers most of the time. You know, very few moments, you know, everybody has to be an innovator on something in their life, but most of the time we follow. We follow what other people are doing. And what we saw in the More in Common data is people don't know where to go. They want to follow, but they don't know who to follow. They don't know where to go. If they join their club, they're back in their own group. They're not with corn farmers from Iowa, or they're not with deli owners from Brooklyn. They're never, so they don't know what to do to find the pattern that they're actually looking for. So I think there's this gigantic unmet hunger. More in Common calls it the exhausted majority. I think of it as a starving majority. I don't think most of us are happy with where we are. I don't think most of us like hating half the country. I don't think we know how to get out of it. And so that's why I say we're looking around and is, you know, like, maybe this place, you know, maybe these people, they seem to, where do you work again? Maybe I'd like to go to work there because that sounds like a place, you know, that's what we're doing. We're all looking around. How do we get out of this? And part of that will just be to find somebody, a context that reinforces these qualities.
Yeah, I mean, oh, so many. I mean, so there's 10 minutes, so we'll just drift into these questions. So here's a starting one, and it's going to be about this point you're just making. We're looking, we're seeking, and I feel like, yeah, I agree, but also I disagree. And this is a question: how could you implement this model, these ideas, I would say, with people who have no way of finding middle ground? And I guess I would interpret that question or adapt it to say, with folks who just disregard the whole premise of the whole endeavor altogether. It's like, no, I'm not interested in that.
Right.
That's not part of what I want to do.
I think you have to create a counterforce. If someone says, and we get this, you know, I got this, I was saying, somebody sent me a post on one of the most extreme websites accusing me of being like a communist infiltrator. You know, it's like 5 terms that were just horrible. And so I think you gotta recognize you're not going to get everybody. And political movements and cultural movements aren't composed of 100% of the people. They're composed usually of, initially, like 10 or 15% of the people. You know, tipping point stuff is, what is it, 10%, Malcolm Gladwell says. Cultural movements, 20%. So, you know, all we need is 20%. We don't need 80%. And, you know, some people come along and say, well, you know, that's, you're trying to do whatever you're trying. I mean, I don't write them off, but I don't think you can start with, you know, we found in the data a group we call super actives. About 40% of the population, about 30% of the population, evenly split, by the way, between Republicans and Democrats, a little bit disproportionately people of faith who feel like they're doing everything. You know the people on the committee, and you're like on every committee, and every committee you show up with, you see the same people. Those are super actives. They're ready to do this work. They're looking for ways to do this work. If you just convinced them to have some kind of a common identity around caring or around healing trauma or around dignity, I don't think it's unmanageable. But it's tough. I mean, there's a lot of force allied against us.
Real quick.
Yeah.
So I think there's another piece that I think is important about trying to sort of have dignity, right? And I think it's, what are the elements of our human experience that cuts across, right? Fear, anger, love, uncertainty, all those things, right? And I think part of that portal is our stories, right? And sharing our stories of fear, sharing our stories of love, all those things, it doesn't necessarily create sort of a kumbaya, right? But in my own work across real significant differences, when there are moments when someone experiences fear that I can relate to, or someone else that has experienced harm that's completely different, there is a way in which I can hear you now.
That's right.
I can see you now. I still disagree with you, but I can see the fact that, oh, you dealt with cancer. Me too. And there's a human connection that I can still disagree with you, but it doesn't mean, it means that it's harder to dehumanize you when I know your human story.
Yeah.
And so part of, I think, cultivating our capacity to practice dignity is through our stories. And it's through sharing, when we crack open ourselves and our humanity spills out, that those are ways that we can really cultivate those spaces of dignity.
Beautiful. Completely, by the way, agree. If you can't see it if we can't see the story that we're a part of, it's very hard to see the humanity. I agree with you. And that, even the Gottmans have talked about this, even in relationships. Like the pause when a relationship becomes toxic, often the first step is history. Tell me your story. Mm-hmm. Tell me, where did this come from? You like to always buy a Ford and I like to buy shit. Whatever the hell it is, doesn't matter. Tell me the story. Where did this start? Mm-hmm. And just listen long enough to then be able, not necessarily to agree, but to be able to balance the disagreement, which may be, in the end, super relevant and maybe less relevant when you find out that we're both cancer survivors. And you know what? We both have children. And we both were scared to death that we were going to leave our children. Okay, wait a minute now. Everything's changed.
Yep.
Yeah, I would just also say on the political level, I think it's shared projects and goals that we should be marching in Washington to protect veterans across the political spectrum, to protect Social Security, protect Medicare. It's finding common cause with people.
Yeah, shared work is big.
Yeah.
Shows up a lot. Yeah. They want projects on the
The more in common data shows.
The more in common says people actually don't want to talk as much about their political difference. They don't want to talk about Trump or this or that. They actually want to figure out, what can we do? If we can do something, that's another part of the story, is what's our forward-looking project that we share?
Sam?
The only thing I would say is I think that we should be very concerned about efforts where we're trying to have people get less exposure to people's stories or differences. I was an international student here. I get very worried about canceling visas, right? I get very worried about that because how can I grow if I'm not exposed to people who have a totally different background? And those where our education institutions are really supposed to be very amplifiers of those opportunities. Yeah. So those are things we should be weary about for sure and really fight hard against, because there's, we learn a lot from being with people who aren't like us, and where those naturally occurring opportunities exist, for those to start to be eliminated, that's really problematic.
Yeah, I'm not to be a pessimist, but I'm still trying to imagine, how all of these ideas get embedded in schooling, right? We're talking across a number of levels. We're talking about things that happen in school. We're talking about what adults can do. And I'm still, I'm struck by or thinking about that 4-year-old who embodies self-awareness in a way that I don't and we don't. And I think about schooling as like all this unlearning. Yeah. And I feel pessimistic about it. And I feel worried that we're creating systems or settings that are just actively pushing against the things that even young kids come along with. So like what's like one really practical thing you would suggest about, let's say, K-12 schooling that you would change in order to enable stories to be shared or something? Like, what would you change right now to make this more likely? And that might be
Well,
our
I had a
last
slide
word.
up there that I ran through because it has 10 bullet points on it, and it was like you couldn't read it. But it's actually an overview of like 10 steps this university could take.
Oh, let's put that back.
But I mean, I don't know if they would work or not, but there's things, I mean, look, schools can do this. Don't be discouraged, Stephen. Schools can teach dignity. They can teach caring. We can teach
I mean, I
empathy.
believe it.
Huh?
I believe that.
And when adults model it, then you have a shot for sustainability. And when administrators then begin to listen to parents and communities as a function of it, then you have the chance to actually surface ways to actually make the school part of the community and make it sustainable and in the interest of the people that are in the school. And when you change the discipline structures to be more restorative and less punitive, then you start to actually surface the kids' capacity to process their pain and their anger and their hostility in ways that are healthy. So, I mean, honestly, I think schools have a trillion problems and make so many mistakes, and we're exposed all the time as educators for what we do wrong. I think we're doing a lot of this right. I don't think we're the best at it. I think we have a long way to go. But I look at institutions around the country, law enforcement, business, politics, the list goes on and on. Who's doing this work better, in my view, than schools? If they're out there, I haven't seen them. But I am seeing interest, like we've seen from big companies. I mean, when big companies call you and say, we need this, they make decisions, they like, okay, wait a second. This is going to help us recruit, mobilize, build teams, make people more efficient, make people stay longer. Hire. That's real. So I think there's a big market. I think the problem we have, generally speaking, people like us on the stage and many people I'm sure in the audience, we don't have enough capacity to reach is that what you were going to say?
I want everyone in the room to know that this is National Week of Conversation. No one mentioned that. There are opportunities all week to talk with people. National Week of Conversation, an initiative of the Listen First Coalition.
Right.
Great, thank you.
National Week of Conversation.
Listen First is fantastic, by the way, another allied organization that shame on me for not mentioning it, so thank you.
Okay, last word from our panelists. Like, what would you change? What are you thinking about? What's the next thing to do?
One thing I'll say about the Dignity Index and seeing it show up in schools, what I like, and I like that similarly with IMB, is a much bigger emphasis on giving people tools for how to think, not what to think. I think we've really rammed down kids' throats, like, think this, think that, you have to say this, you have to say that, and they're like, why would I walk into, my 12-year-old says this, why would I walk into a classroom and talk about my identity or anything when they've told me I have to think this and I have to say this and I have to do this? So the more tools we can give them to work out other things with other kids, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson we need to learn is how to listen. And I think the index is a tool to force us to do the mirror effect, which is the deep listening about my thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm looking and examining my thoughts about whatever is said. And that is, I think, is an important part of how to listen. That's in order to listen. So anyway, we're running out of time.
Listening's superpower. I agree.
I was going to say the same thing. I was, but anyway, well, two things. One, I just want to reinforce something that Tim said. I mean, my strong feeling, and we see this in our data, is that people are really sick of this. Like, there are a lot of people out there who are tired of the meanness and are tired of the cruelty and the divisiveness and want something different. So I feel pretty hopeful about this, actually.
So there's an appetite.
And I think at the school level, people are getting this. The one tool I would use at the school level, I said earlier, Jean just said, is listening and listening to people's stories. And we're doing a project with StoryCorps where we're trying to get kids in, whatever we're calling them now, blue states, listening to the stories of kids in red states and vice versa. And we could be doing this at scale. We could be doing a lot of this.
Yeah, beautiful. I agree.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you.
Great.